Now, the mysteries of the ill-fated Loch Sloy. The ship was wrecked off Kangaroo Island more than a century ago, killing most on board, but some did survive, and as Caroline Winter reports, archaeologists are now rediscovering their dramatic tales.
There's no doubting the beauty of Kangaroo Island's Wild West, but this stunning coastline has a very, very dark side.
It crashes in there, and these people that would have been on this boat, it would have been horrendous.
It was in the early hours of April 24, 1899 along this treacherous coast when the Loch Sloy met its end.
Instead of pulling to port, they pulled to the starboard, which took them closer to the land, and they found it on a reef about 200 yards from shore.
Heavy seas lashed the ship as the 34 on board struggled to hold on to the rigging, but for most it would be in vain. Within 20 minutes the Loch Sloy was wrecked at Morphettsui Bay and all but 4 men died.
We call this the killer coast of Kangaroo Island because it's tough on shipwrecks, but it's even tougher on survivors.
The survivors were washed onto rocks and managed to climb a steep cliff to search for help. But the isolated, inhospitable and expansive landscape took its toll. 15 days after the Loch Sloy wrecked, one of the men, Duncan Macmillan, stumbled into the backyard of Gordon May's grandfather Charles May's property at the Rocky River homestead.
When the dog started barking and Macmillan appeared out of the scrub, they reckoned the tongue was all swollen up, and anyway they administered a bit of tender loving care to him, and he eventually later on told them the story of the wreck.
A search party was launched in which the May family and local community would play a central role. The authorities were alerted, and 2 days later John Simpson and William Mitchell were discovered by a lighthouse keeper.
There he found the 2 sailors chawing on a dead penguin. Anyway, he bounded to their feet. Just imagine how that fellas had walked that far in bare feet. It's unbelievable.
Sadly, the 4th man who survived the wreck never made it. David Kilpatrick's body was buried where it was found almost a month after the disaster. The grave remains today and is a memorial to the lives lost in shipwrecks along the west coast. But what about the many others who died?
Grandfather was with the party that buried 11 one morning.
It's these burials that recently brought a group of researchers to the island. They too made part of that arduous journey once travelled by the survivors and rescuers 114 years ago. These rock piles, placed here by Charles May, helped guide them to the site.
The rocks indicate, when you line them up, they indicate the direction to where the shipwreck currently lies. They also are placed close to where the survivors came ashore.
Maritime archaeologist Amar Khan says they came to try and identify any burial remains.
The idea really is for us to determine whether any of these sites, if they do exist, whether there is compelling evidence of those graves to still be here, and whether we would need to protect those sites.
We're having a look at a potential burial site, and we know that because of the shape of the rocks that have been piled up here, which is quite unusual for this place.
The team spent 5 days assessing areas below and above the cliff, but after careful examination, no traces of bone were found. This research expedition hasn't just been conducted on land. A few days ago, and when these waters were calmer, a boat was sent out to survey the area and search for the wreck. Using a magnetometer, a location was found, and while it's yet to be confirmed, it may just indicate where some of the remains of the Loch Sloy lie.
That's really going to be the starting point for how we investigate the next phase of this project, and that is to find the shipwreck itself.
But the whereabouts of the wreck hasn't always been a mystery.
We discovered what we thought looked like the stern piece of a large sailing type vessel, and it was hard up against the bricks. It was right up against the edge of the cliff, but that's all there was.
Roger Williams, along with friends Gifford Chapman and Alan Roberts, dived on what they believe was the Loch Sloy's remains in the 1970s.
I personally have never seen the ribs, but I know of other divers that have seen them. They are there, and not a long way from where we discovered the stern post.
Dozens of souls lost their lives in 4 wrecks, including the Loch Sloy, along this killer coastline.
It was the loss of that much life on this coast that eventually convinced enough people in Adelaide to take the measures required to set up the Cape Takuti Lighthouse and the Neptune Light.
While devastating, their deaths did not go unnoticed, and archaeologists like these will ensure their memory lives on.